Hello YouTube, this is Lance Egan here from Fly Fish Food, and I want to show you one of my favorite go-to streamers. This is a streamer that we've been fishing for a long while. It's basically a woolly bugger variation, so it's not very elaborate. I hate to disappoint you, but as you may have noticed from lots of my flies, they're not very elaborate. I like pretty simple flies. When I fish streamers, I tend to fish a lot of this style of fly. This particular one is my absolute go-to color combination for just average conditions. And without further ado, we give you what my friends affectionately call the big junk. So we're starting with, it's not actually that big is the funny part, it's a smaller hook, but ironic as it may be, we've got a Haddock Competition 950. This is a number 8. You could tie them in different sizes as well, but this is a really good size. I think you'll find for most trout fishing. So I've got that in the vise. We're going to use some Danville 140 in light olive thread. We're going to use this because it's pretty strong stuff, and we're going to wrap some eyes on here. So I'm going to start the thread and make a nice base for the eyes, and then I'm going to tie the eyes in. The eyes are hairline double pupil lead eyes, size large. They look something like this guy right here. Alright, so the one mistake that I find I make on this fly a lot, well, one of many mistakes I make, the most common one I make on this fly is that I put the eyes too close to the eye of the hook. So I'm going to try and resist that temptation right now and place them further back than I think they need to be, because if I do that, then they usually end up just about right. So I'm going to mount the eyes on top of the hook, which, as most of you streamer junkies will know, will invert the fly so it'll ride hook point up in the water. And I'm going to figure 8 the eyes with the thread. Whoops. And I like to give them just a few wraps to hold them in place. And then I'm going to come in here with some super glue and put some dots of glue on them to really lock them in. So we'll get a little dot on the bottom, a dot on the top, and then I'll continue figure 8ing these eyes in place. I do some wraps around the thread itself and then figure 8 around just the eyes, and I like to build quite a thread base around those eyes. There you can see what we've done there. Now that I've got them pretty locked in, they really shouldn't go anywhere. I've got them pretty steady on there to where they're not going to go, especially once the glue dries. They'll be dialed in. Alright, now we've got our eyes mounted in place. They're nice and level. I'm going to rotate the thread back to the bend of the hook, and we're going to add a marabou tail, as you might have guessed since I mentioned that it's a woolly bugger variation. So keeping in mind that this is going to ride hook point up, we're going to use 2 colors of marabou in this guy. One is the sculpin olive color and one is ginger. Here you go, ginger and the magic sculpin olive UV from Fish Hunter and Nature Spirit. So because it's going to ride hook point up, I want the ginger to end up being on the bottom of the fly, the lighter belly of the minnow, and the darker on top, if that makes any sense. So what we're going to do is tie the olive on first, and then when I flip that fly over, the ginger is going to be tied on last, which is going to make it be on the bottom. So I'm going to pull some of these fibers off of this marabou stem here and tie these guys in place. Catch them with the thread. I'm not too worried about their placement right at the moment, and I am going to tie these long, just like the humongous. If you saw our humongous video, I tend to like these marabou streamers with an elongated tail, longer than is standard on most buggers anyhow. Most woolly buggers would have the tail is the same length as the shank of the hook. We're going to do this one probably more like twice the length of the shank. Okay, so now that I've got both materials in place, now I can really work on migrating them and manipulating them so that I want them, or so that I get them where I want them as far as split, half top, half bottom. And then one more trick with this, just like the humongous, if you tie them down the shank just a little further than you think you should, even into the bend a little bit, they don't look as neat in the box, but they just foul a lot less than if you keep them, I finished off right up here where the tail would be sticking straight away. They just foul more often for me, where if you move them down the shank just a little bit, they don't foul. Then I'm going to come in here in the back and actually break these tips off with my fingers. Most of them were actually already pretty close to where I wanted them to terminate, but we're going to break them off and just make them nice and clean. Just like that. Okay, next up we're going to add the flash in the tail, which is just lateral scale, 1733. It's a pearlescent kind of mirage type tinsel. It has a lot of reflection to it, really mirrors everything around it. And I don't want much of this on there. I usually just put 1 or 2 strands on each side. I think for this one we'll do 2. Remember, 2 per side. So I pulled off 2 strands, and I'm going to try and use the natural curl. You have a little natural curl that's angling down towards the fly, and I'm going to have them naturally curl in towards the marabou tail. So I'm going to pinch these and capture them on my side of the hook, and then tighten them up on this other side and grab them with the thread and rotate them around to your side of the hook. And then I should be able to manipulate them a bit with the thread again to hold them on either side. Okay, then over here we can come in and trim these. I like them about the same length as the tail. So I've now trimmed the lateral scale off. You can see it's on both sides. And we're set for the next step. So next up, we're going to add a hackle to this fly, which I'm going to reinforce with monofilament to make it more durable. So I've just got some 6X tippet. Whatever your favorite brand is works great. Or if you even have a brand that you don't like that you bought at the store, this is probably a good use for it. So I've got some 6X tippet material. I've tied it in along the shank. And then our next step is to add a chenille body. For the body, we're going to use Sculpin Olive Woolly Bugger chenille from Wapsi. These Sculpin Olive colors from Wapsi have become a favorite of mine. If you've seen the Thread Frenchie video, you know about the merits of the UTC Sculpin Olive wire. It's a really cool color. I've pulled the material off of the core, and I'm tying in just the core of the chenille right here at the back. That way I limit the amount of bulk we have at the back end of it. You can see I've got a little more bulk at the back end, but not too much. It shouldn't really show up once we get the fly going forward. Okay, then I'm just going to throw a 1/2 inch in for the thread. Use our fancy dancy rotary vise and use the bobbin cradle, and we'll migrate the chenille. This is size small chenille to keep the body a little more on the thin side. I'm going to wrap it just right up to the eyes like that, and then get the bobbin cradle out of the way. Capture the chenille with the thread right behind the eyes, and then get rid of it. Okay, so now we added our Sculpin Olive body. Next up is the hackle, which you can use lots of things for hackle. My absolute favorite is a Whiting product. This is their American saddle, rooster saddle, and this is grizzly dyed golden olive. You can see it's a really pretty color. You could also use just regular olive instead of golden olive, grizzly dyed olive, or you could use even a like strung Chinese saddle, something that's a bit less expensive if you didn't want to invest in an entire saddle. Just anything olive is going to do the trick here. Okay, so I've selected a feather. I'm going to start with the feather near the fluffy part, the bottom of it, and I'm going to pull some of these fibers back and just create a little tie-in point. So I'll stroke those guys back like that, then come in and give them a trim, and that leaves me with a little wedge looking piece like this. I'm going to shorten up those tags so that they almost work like a little Velcro piece. They're not really loops like Velcro, but I find that if I leave those instead of stripping it completely, that the hackle doesn't slip out as often. Watch, it'll slip out on this one, but normally that's not an issue. So I've got the hackle tied in with just a couple of wraps. I'm going to throw another whip finish or a 1/2 inch in place here, and then we're going to wrap this hackle backward. So this guy is going to go back towards the marabou tail, just spacing out the wraps, and then I'm going to grab the monofilament while I'm holding tension on the hackle, and this is where a rotary vise is really handy again, and rotate it around, and I'm going to capture the hackle with the monofilament, and then under tension wiggle the mono back and forth and wind it up the fly. You might trap a couple of fibers with the mono, but it makes the hackle so much more durable that I think you'll really appreciate having it reinforced with that monofilament. Last, I'll capture the monofilament, the 6x tippet with the thread, and then just get rid of it. I've got a few of these fibers that are acting a little poorly here and not manipulating them the way I want, so I'm going to use a little bit of thread to pull them back. And then we've got the hackle in the back here that I'm going to trim away. Now that I've caught him with the monofilament, he's good to go. Alright, and the next step is we're going to add a dubbed head. So this is a cool product. We actually had this product made for us by Mr. John Romer. Most of you are probably familiar with semi-seal. These are some colors of semi-seal that we had specially made. So Arizona semi-seal and dark sculpin junk and light sculpin junk. We're going to do the light sculpin junk on this one, and I'm going to use the trusty Stonfo dubbing twister. This little guy's the best in the business in my opinion. I've tried lots of dubbing twisters, but this one's my absolute favorite. It's got these neat little hooks on it that make life really easy. So I'm going to grab the thread with these hooks and create a fairly long dubbing loop. I like to wrap my thread around the loop a couple times to make it so that it terminates at a point. So I just find it holds onto the material a little better that way. And then once I've got that done, I'm going to move the thread up to where it connects to the eye, and then we can capture it with the wrap on the eye and hold it in the bobbin cradle. That way it's out of our way. So next I'm going to add to this one, I'm going to do the light sculpin junk. Again, you could adapt and do the dark sculpin junk if you like. If the sculpins in your river are dark and you're feeling like you want to be really imitative, then use the dark one. They're both really cool colors. So I've got some of this light sculpin junk semi-seal. It's a pretty coarse dubbing. I'm going to get pinches of the dubbing and slide them up to where they're near the eyes. And the cool thing about this dubbing twister is that it's spring loaded, so it's hard to see on the camera, but as I pull, you can see the thread come together, and as I give it slack, it opens up. So when it opens up, I can add more dubbing, and then when I want to hold it in place, I pull tight on the twister and it holds them still so they don't fall out. And every time I'm ready to add more, I loosen it up at the bottom end, slide some more dubbing in, and just keep following suit. So we're going to add the dubbing in small pinches and make a nice dubbing loop. And once I've got enough dubbing to rotate around the eyes a few times, we're going to give the tool a little twist. And this will make a really durable head. And then I'm going to take a little bit of Velcro here and just tease the dubbing out a little bit so it's laying back a bit more than when it was first twisted up. And then I'm just going to figure eight it around the eyes. I usually start by going over the top and underneath, and then over the top and on the eye side, then underneath, and then I usually do a full circle. And at this point, I usually just start eyeballing. I've kind of covered everything that I think I need. I can go back and forth a couple of times to coat wherever I feel like I need a little bit more dubbing. There's no real right or wrong way to do this. You're just coating the eyes with dubbing. Okay, now I've used all the dubbing that I pulled off, and I'm going to capture it with the thread. So I've got the dubbing loop caught up right here near the eye. Move my bobbin cradle out of the way. Now I've got a little bit of a mess going at the front, which is okay because we're going to tease it out anyway. So I'm going to pull some of that back with my fingers, stroke some of those fibers back. And if you end up with a couple of stragglers, don't worry about it. The fish don't care. You're going to be swimming this thing pretty quick anyway. Then we'll build up a little cleaner head, whip finish, and we're almost done. Whip finish, get rid of the thread, and one last thing I like to do is just run the Velcro through this dubbing a little bit more, pull it out a bit, and then once you've got it pulled out, then you can start stroking it back. And this guy pushes a little bit of water with the eyes. It doesn't have a lot of bulk, not a lot of casting bulk because it's marabou and dubbing and a little bit of chenille. But in the water it has a nice profile. A sculpin, as you might remember, has a larger head than the rest of its body. So this guy's got he's a little bit raggy, but that's okay because those fibers as you get in the water are just going to push backward. And we've got a larger head tapering to a thinner body. So with the hackle, it's got a bit of movement. The dubbing's going to pulse, give you a little bit of movement. And then the long tail is really important to this fly. It has tons and tons of movement in the tail. That is the big junk streamer. Try that one on your favorite trout stream.